So the first one, yesterday, we were talking about the new content about unemployment. Okay, if you recall, unemployment, we talked about 4 types. The first one is structural. This is the one that I mentioned about. It's a skill issue type of thing. They don't have enough skills to transit to another job. Singapore did experience this a few times as we were transiting from a developing to a developed nation. So this one, I leave it to you to think about the dates that I mentioned yesterday. Okay, recently in COVID, there was also one problem. Okay, the next one is frictional. Frictional, if you recall, is what I mentioned about you graduating. You do not have enough time to find a job yet. So you're still in between jobs. Frictional is kind of like in between jobs, in between. Last one is a bit weaker, is seasonal. Not very applicable to Singapore, but especially some jobs are only available during the seasons, be it winter specific jobs such as, I don't know, skiing, or summer specific jobs such as being at a lifeguard at the sea for American countries, which is more common, or things like a swimming coach maybe. The last one is the most important one, is cyclical. Okay, I'm going to draw a yellow circle around it. Now, cyclical is the most common one they will test alongside growth and unemployment because, growth as well as inflation. So growth, inflation, and unemployment, 3 things are usually together. Cyclical unemployment is the result of the fall in AD. And when you describe unemployment, you got to use the word derived demand. Derived demand means that when you demand for goods and services, naturally you will demand for things that are related to those goods and services. In this case, we are saying that labor is a derived demand, which makes sense. The example I gave yesterday was that when people want bubble tea, more bubble tea over the years, bubble tea vendors and firms, naturally, they will want to find more people to make the bubble tea. And that's how labor gets employed. That's how unemployment falls. A very good example, if you think about it, in Singapore is for the Changi airports. So we have created terminals after terminals. And each time when the terminal is being built, in the news, they will say it will create a certain amount of jobs. It would help the economy. This is an example of it. Because when you build an airport and people, naturally, they demand for the aircraft services, they demand for food and beverages services over there at the airport or other related services, you will need people to fill up those roles. Okay, so if you walk away from this lesson forgetting everything, one of the things I hope you remember would be cyclical unemployment. Think of this as a sneak preview to the lessons you're about to learn in school. Okay. I'm going to touch on the policies on how to improve unemployment. I'm going to tackle them specifically to 4 different types. Okay. Now, seasonal, we're going to cross it off. Okay. It's a bit like structural. Structural unemployment, you basically got to improve training. So when it comes to training, fiscal policy is useful. Fiscal. Because you can use government spending to boost the economy to train up these people by giving up subsidies, such as the recent vouchers that government gives out. It could help with to tide people through unemployment. But to solve unemployment, maybe you can think about the skills future courses that the government has been rolling out the past few years. Basically, government funds and subsidize these courses so that maybe unemployed people around my age, we might be able to go for courses to have more skills and land us different jobs. Okay, so I'm going to write here skills future. Okay. Structural unemployment is usually a very straightforward type of unemployment where the skill set just doesn't match. So when you think about training, I also want you to think about education. Okay? In economics, these 2 are always together, just like good friends. Education is slightly different from training because education, I want you to think along the lines of how much the Singapore government invests in our universities, how education is heavily subsidized for Singaporeans, for example, okay, or how there are sufficient teachers, professors, or infrastructures in Singapore to have universities. So this is one theoretical way to improve structural unemployment, but we're thinking of improving it like a few years in the future. And like, it's not like, oh, now there is structural unemployment, then I have to build more universities. No, it's more of a preemptive measure for the future where I build it now so that next time I might not face that much structural unemployment. Next, cyclical. Cyclical unemployment would be a very straightforward one as well. So it's an increase of AD because the main reason for cyclical unemployment to occur is because there is not enough demand. So you got to boost up demand. Now, when you increase AD, again, there are three different ways. Okay, you can either do it monetary policy, exchange rate, or fiscal policy. Okay, take note, this fiscal policy over here on the right-hand side, sometimes the school might call it the supply side policy. Okay, but I call it fiscal policy because it requires government spending. Either way, if you describe the policy sufficiently enough, if you use the correct terms, the name of it doesn't, they won't penalize you for it. Meaning that you and I can take the exam, you choose fiscal policy and I choose supply side policy, but we describe it the same way, you will still get the marks for it. Frictional is when you can't transit from one job to another. So this is a very largely informational base. If you recall from your market failure, there's this thing called factor immobility. Okay, you can think of it linked to this, but it's more of labor immobility. Okay, you can solve it through two ways. Number one, you improve your infrastructure. So we're thinking about countries, bigger countries like Malaysia and USA, where it's Malaysia and USA where there's a lot of states. So a lot of states, right? It's harder to transit between states if you don't have the proper infrastructure like trains, roads. Another one is you improve the information. Okay, this is a very general way of talking about the policies just to give you an idea of it. But it should be useful for you for now. We can go more in depth when we face the questions.